Who did he get married to?
So his first wife was Khadija.
Where do you get the information?
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of historians that are...
Like
well,
which ones?
When I told you about the hadith, right? When I told you about how the hadith is authenticated, right? It's who was there when they said it, and who was there when they said it, who was there, and who was there, to the point where who was around the Prophet when they heard him say that.
So in other words, you are now appealing to the hadiths. Yeah? And I'm going to tell you, Sahih al-Bukhari comes 250 years after the death of Muhammad. And please explain to me, from a resource which came at least 250 years. I don't even believe it came 250 years ago. This is the Islamic claim.
So are you Christian? Right?
I am a Christian. So even if I take it at face value, that Sahih al-Bukhari was written 250 years after Muhammad. Right. The question is, how do you know, how did Sahih al-Bukhari know about that?
But could you not apply that to the Bible as well?
Okay, I can apply the same thing to the Bible. Okay, about the person of Jesus Christ. Okay. We have first century resources, evidence or records from Christian witnesses, records from non-Christian Roman historians from the first century, records from non-Christian Jewish historian from the first century, records from non-Christian Greek writers from the first century. Right in the century when Jesus walked on the face of the earth, we have evidence. Now about Muhammad, do you have any first century Islamic Hijrah, first century evidence?
So what you're saying is, I'm aware that the earliest manuscripts of the Bible in Quranic Greek was 70 AD after Jesus Christ, right?
70 AD.
Yeah, that's what you're saying. About 50 to 70 AD, right? But you're saying it's within the first
century. Yeah.
Right? But those manuscripts, right, are written in Quranic Greek. What language did Jesus speak? He spoke Aramaic. So the Gospel of Jesus, right?
I don't understand what you're saying. What I'm saying is simple. I am giving you, whichever language, I'm giving you evidence or records of details about the person of the historical person of Jesus Christ from the first century. And I'm asking you the question, for Muhammad.
When a Muslim at Speaker's Corner objects by saying that the Bible was only written around 50 to 70 AD, we first need to clarify what that actually means. It does not refer to the physical manuscripts that survive today, but to the time of composition, when the original authors actually wrote their works. Scholars across the spectrum agree that Paul's undisputed letters were already in circulation by the early to mid-50s AD, just 20 years after the crucifixion of Jesus. This dating is secure because Paul was alive at the time, and the book of Acts even mentions him in connection with a Roman official whose tenure is historically attested to the year 51. In other words, these are texts written within the lifetime of eyewitnesses. The Gospel of Mark is typically placed in the mid-60s to early 70s, around the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, followed shortly by Matthew and Luke. Even John's Gospel, considered the latest, still belongs at the close of the first century. All of this means that the Christian tradition was recorded in writing within a single generation, not centuries later. It is true that the oldest physical manuscripts we possess come from the 2nd century, but that is entirely normal in the ancient world. Papyrus and parchment rarely survived, and constant copying was necessary. What sets the New Testament apart is the sheer number of manuscripts, thousands of them, along with the quotations from early church leaders like Clement, Ignatius, and Polycarp, who were already echoing these texts by the end of the 1st and the beginning of the 2nd century. Non-Christian sources such as Tacitus, Josephus, and Pliny also confirm the existence of Jesus and his followers within a very short time frame. Now compare that with the early Islamic story of Muhammad's encounter with the angel Gabriel in the cave of Hira. The Qur'an does mention Gabriel by name, but it never tells this story in detail. The specifics, Gabriel's embrace, the command to read, Muhammad's fear and confusion, and the role of Waraqah are only found in the hadith and the sīrah. Ibn Ishaq's biography of Muhammad was not written until the 8th century, and the version we have today is Ibn Hisham's edited recension from the 9th century. The famous collection of Sahih al-Bukhari was completed around 870, more than 200 years after the event said to have occurred in 610. In other words, the detailed account of Muhammad's first revelation was only codified in writing after a far longer gap than what we see in the Christian tradition. This is the crucial difference. The New Testament was born within one generation of the eyewitnesses, supported by abundant textual evidence and confirmed across multiple communities. The story of Muhammad's revelation through Gabriel, by contrast, only took shape as a complete narrative centuries later, relying on chains of oral transmission that were eventually written down.
Can you give me...
Talk about witnesses.
Yeah,
right?
for Muhammad, let me finish.
Who
For
witnessed
1
Jesus
second.
Christ being crucified? All of his companions were crucified.
No, you're confusing me now. No,
what
1 second.
you're saying
1
is-
second.
what you're saying
What's
is-
your name?
My name is Ali.
Ali, Ali, please, you need to focus. You need to stay focused on the question I'm asking. The question and the point I'm making is simple. About the
you've got beef, you've got quarrel whether who Muhammad is historically and what his position was in history. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
You're saying
I am trying to
because you
understand.
don't- Because I mean, I have not really studied this, right? I'm not a person of knowledge. Like I said, there's people in the spot that are more knowledgeable than I am, right? But you know, I'm not understanding. Are you saying that the earliest records of Prophet Muhammad? You're saying it's 250 years after he died, right? I don't understand. Are you saying that
I am saying these are later fanciful ideas.
fanciful ideas? Okay.
Later fanciful ideas, earlier resources that we get contradicts the claims by the later fanciful ideas. That's my claim.
Give me an example.
Okay, good. That's a good question. So, you are told that Jibril
Okay.
came to Muhammad
Yeah.
to reveal the Quran.
Okay.
That's the later source.
Yeah.
The hadiths talk about that. Later source. But the Quran itself is an earlier source. We don't know how we got the Quran, but we have a book called the Quran, which we have manuscripts for this book from even around the time of 650 AD. So we have, from the 1st century of Islam, we have this book. Now, I am reading the Quran, and the Quran tells me that Islamic Allah, the Quranic text says, no angel visited Muhammad. Here, Surah 6. If I read from verse 7, but my focus right now is verse 9, verse 8 and verse 9. They say, it's now narrating how people are challenging Muhammad, or challenging the one about whom this is talking. It says, they say, why has not an angel been sent down to him? Why has there not been an angel sent down to him? If we send down an angel, then the matter would be judged. No further time would be allowed. If that were to happen, in other words, what he is saying is, the challenge is people around Muhammad, or people around the person who is being referred to here, are asking, why did this guy not receive a revelation from an angel? And the answer being given is, if an angel were to come and reveal something, then there would not be any more time given. In other words, because of that reason, I am not sending down an angel, is what this verse is saying.
So
Please read.
they say, why has an angel been sent down? If we sent down an angel, then the matter will be resolved.
So it's clearly saying, well, if I had, as a possibility, if I had done this, then the situation would be different. And so it is suggesting that he didn't do it. Bear in mind, this is in the Quran, but according to the later sources, according to the later fantasy sources, the very beginning of the revelation of the Quran was after the visitation of Jibril. Yeah? Jibril came and spoke, and only then any revelation was given to Muhammad. That is the claim of the later fantasy sources. But the Quran itself claims that is not the case. And so we have a problem. We find manuscripts for the Quran from the 1st century. We don't, even Islam says Sahih al-Bukhari was written later. And this says no angel involved. In other words, this idea that an angel came and revealed something to Muhammad is fantasy. Do you see my point?
Surah Al-An'am 6.7 presents a striking hypothetical. Even if God were to send down a physical book written on parchment, what the Arabic text calls kirtas, a loan word from the Greek sharts through the Syriac kertasa, the unbelievers would still reject it and accuse it of being mere sorcery. The use of the word kitab here clearly refers to a written revelation, something already familiar in Jewish and Christian tradition through the Torah and the Gospel. Yet the Quran insists that even if this standard were met, rejection would remain inevitable. Implicitly, this acknowledges the authority of written scripture, but at the same time it dismisses the possibility that the Quran itself could be verified in the same way. The next verse, Surah Al-An'am 6:8, continues with another argument. The unbelievers demand, "Why has no angel been sent down to him?" The word malak comes from the root mimlam kaf, which parallels the Hebrew malak, meaning messenger or angel. In the biblical tradition, angels often appeared openly before many witnesses, accompanied by divine signs. For example, the angelic host announcing Christ's birth to the shepherds. But the Qur'an rejects this scenario. It declares that if an angel truly were sent, the matter would be settled, meaning judgment would immediately fall, leaving no chance for repentance. In other words, the angel's presence is not offered as proof, but as the signal that time has run out. Then, in Surah Al-An'am 6:9, the reasoning goes further. Even if an angel were sent, he would be transformed into a rajul, a man, so that people could interact with him. But here a new problem arises. If an angel appears in human form, how could anyone distinguish him from an ordinary man or even from a deceiving spirit? The word labasna, from the root lambasin, carries the meaning of covering, confusing, or mixing things up. And in this verse, it conveys the sense of being thrown into doubt. The verse closes by admitting that even if an angel came in the form of a man, confusion and uncertainty would remain. From an apologetic perspective, this passage undermines the Qur'an's own claim. Muhammad claimed to receive revelation from Gabriel, yet the Qur'an itself acknowledges that angels could only appear in the form of men, a form impossible for others to verify. No witnesses, no public signs, no historical markers. In contrast, when God gave revelation in the Bible, he did so openly, before the eyes of his people, accompanied by mighty signs and historical evidence. Moses received the law at Sinai before all Israel, with thunder and fire. Jesus rose from the dead, witnessed by many, with angels present at the tomb in full view. Thus, Surah Al-An'am 6:7-9 is not a report that an angel actually came to Muhammad. It is a rhetorical defense against the demands of unbelievers. The irony is that the passage itself opens up a troubling gap. If angels can only appear in human form, how could Muhammad ever be certain that what he saw was truly Gabriel, and not simply a delusion, or worse, a deception?